This is a presentation from work we did in Scotland that has been going on for a couple of years now, which is work by me and by Ingrid Kelling, my colleague at Heriot University, who just spoke, so she's in the room. I don't know if she wants to introduce herself, but I'll leave that to her. So we have been working together on this model, systemic shifts, to create a scenario-based model for improving fishers' well-being in Scotland. The idea behind this research was to look at fishers' well-being in contexts like Scotland, like in the global north, highly industrial fishing context, as a complex system, which is circular and dynamic rather than linear, and focusing only on specific aspects, as we know well-being, traditionally. We noticed that in research, usually this is not addressed as this way. And that's because well-being is different for different people. Everybody thinks something else when they speak about well-being. Everybody's interested about something else. But to our knowledge, to our belief, let's say, it should include all the sustainability pillars, the economic, environmental, social, governance, and human. And it should come from combining everybody's views and perspectives. So this is what this research was actually and fundamentally based on. The rationale is that we don't see it often addressed as a holistic system, well-being in fisheries. And that's, as I said, is because the stakeholders have conflicting interests, but also different goals. They want to achieve different things when they want to improve their well-being. They define it differently. And also when it comes to designing policies to improve well-being, different stakeholders have different accessibility and influence on policymaking, and also different timings. So this research wants to look at what well-being for fishers would look like if everybody came together and decided all together what it looks like, and how these elements they would come up with interact with each other. So create basically a system. The ultimate aim of this research that we're presenting today is to create scenarios for sustainability fishers practices encompassing well-being, like in the framework of a well-being economy, where what we care the most is the well-being of people rather than economic growth. So we wanted to create these scenarios, but we wanted to create them through community engagement, so co-create them basically with the stakeholders, to have these 5 characteristics: to be collaborative, holistic, actionable, acceptable by everyone, and most of all, realistic. So we designed the participatory exercise that I'm going to walk you through in the next slides, if they change. So the framework of the work, how we designed it, though it changed a lot along the way, but the basic idea is this: it would be a 3-loop exercise. So in the first loop, which was the first part, and we would ask stakeholder representatives to map well-being the way they think it is. And then we would combine all this knowledge to create a shared well-being map, so a well-being map made by everyone. And then this well-being map would be analyzed for commonalities and trade-offs, and we would identify the baseline scenario, so it is actually happening now. And that's the first loop. And then in the second loop, based on this baseline scenario and the map we have created, we would co-design alternative scenarios. So using the map that we created, we would see what we can change and how. And also based on the analysis that we did on that I will talk about in a minute, we would also identify the key performance indicators for well-being, in the sense that we would define what we want to change in the end. So all the interventions that we will make in a scenario, what is it that we want to achieve? And that's what we measure in the end. And then in the third loop, we would compare the systemic shifts, so how the whole system changed, we would compare the KPIs and how the KPIs change. And then in a third participatory exercise, we would evaluate the outcomes with the stakeholders. So we will go back to the stakeholders. We are now at this stage, as we're speaking, at the third loop, and we're comparing the scenario outputs. So the methodology is this. First, we created an indicator. I will walk you through this in detail in the next slides, but this is just the pathway. I don't know. Move this one. First we created an indicators list, a list of indicators of fishers' well-being. Then we created the individual maps. So every person designed the map of well-being as they see it. And they also asked in the same exercise to give a score to each indicator. I will explain in a minute how this was done. These maps were aggregated to create one community map, and the indicator scorings was also aggregated to create average scores for each indicator. The map was analyzed through descriptive network analysis. And apart from that, we created also modularity classes, so clusters of indicators based on how they connect. And based on this network analysis and the modularity classes, we co-created scenarios with the stakeholders, and we co-decided the KPIs with the stakeholders. We simulated the scenarios, and we are going to evaluate the outcome, which is the final step. So, taking all the methodological steps one by one, the first part was to create the individual maps. So we used the fuzzy cognitive map framework, let's call it. Fuzzy cognitive map is basically a depiction of how a system operates. And this is an example. Let's say this is a small system of 4 components. And for example, in this example, component 2 affects component 1 positively. So if component 2 increases, then component 1 also increases, and strongly. That's because we have 2 pluses as opposite to 1. And component 4 affects component 1, but negatively. So if 4 increases, 1 decreases, and vice versa. And strongly as well, because we have 2 minuses. Okay, then this is an individual map. And then to combine these maps and create the community map, this is the process. So let's say the first stakeholder did this map and the second did this map. We combine all the arrows and we add up the symbols. And this is how the community map is created in its visual form. So in practice, we had, based on the literature and based on expert knowledge, we had a list of, I think, about 20 indicators or 22, if I'm not mistaken. And we presented them to the stakeholders in this form. If they were doing it online, it was on Miro board, and it was like what you see on the left. And if it was on paper, depending on how they preferred, it looked like what you see on the right. And we asked them to provide the links, so what affects what, in which direction, and by how much. And this is what the result looked like. This is a fuzzy cognitive map of one person, I think specifically probably a fisher. So here you can see, for example, this person believes that the quality of the crew positively affects the quantity of the catch quite highly, because 3 was the highest. We had 3 levels, 1, 2, and 3. Similarly, they believe that the diversification of both activities affects the quality of crew, which then affects the quantity of the catch, but it affects it negatively, but not a lot. And this specific person, all these indicators that we have here on the side, they didn't want them in the system. They left them out. They didn't think that they affect in any way fishers' well-being. In total, we had 7 fishers, 5 researchers, 3 representatives, and by representatives, I mean federations, associations, unions, and so on, people that, speak on behalf of the fishers. Civil society, which is things like the Fishermen's Mission or the Seafarers Charity, these kind of organizations that take care of fishers. And then we have 4 government representatives, in total 23, if I had it correctly. We had 37 indicators in the end, because apart from asking them to do connections and strength, we also asked them to add indicators if they wanted to. So in the end, we started with 22, but as you can see, everybody added indicators. So we ended up with 37 and with 301 connections between them. I'm going to go through very quickly each stakeholder group maps. So this is the outcome of the 7 fishers that came together. So it's the community map just from the fishers. The size of the bubble shows the importance of the element, of the component or the indicator in the system. And it's defined by the number of arrows that come in and out and the strength of these arrows. And as you can see, for fishers, the most important is investment. You can see how many things it's affected by and how many things it affects. But then job satisfaction, quality of life, and economic security. But you will notice that these 3 do not affect nearly anything. They only have incoming arrows. So they're ultimate goals. You know, this is what you want to achieve. And once you achieve that, it doesn't affect anything else. This is what you want. But I'm going to focus a little bit on, and I'll explain in a minute why. I'm going to show you mental health, which is here on the side. It's not affecting anything. And the only thing that affects is access to healthcare. Stock levels are for fishers also, you know, are not super important in their well-being. They're affected by how they influence the policies, and they affect the quantity of the catch. And evidence policy decision also stands a little bit on the side. If you look at the researchers, on the other hand, again, investment is the highest, the most important element. So is economic security, but stock levels start becoming a little bit more important, although they're still on the side. But here we see interesting that mental health starts taking a more important role in the system for researchers only, okay? Moving on to the representatives map, we start seeing a more interesting thing. Again, investment is the highest, the element with the highest degree, the more important element, and job satisfaction as well. But again, similarly to fishers, because they speak for them, mental health doesn't affect much. However, on the other hand, stock levels become to be a little more important, and more importantly, they're related to investment. Okay, so yes, they don't relate too much, but they relate both ways to the most important indicator of the system. When we go to civil society, which is all the NGOs and organizations that try to take care of fishers, things start becoming very interesting, because mental health here is super central. Because they care about the mental health of the fishers and they study it and evaluate it, they know how to consider it important. Investment, again, is the strongest element, but we see the quality of life and job satisfaction, they still have a lot of arrows coming in and out, but they're not the biggest bubbles in the system. And stock level here on the side also starts becoming more important. Finally, we have the government map. Just to run through it very quickly, mental health is similar to what the fishers believe. Again, for them, investment is super important. Okay, this works. I'll go to stock levels. Stock levels are very important for the governments, a lot more important than any other stakeholder map, where evidence policy decisions are only a goal. They don't affect anything. They're only affected by 3 things. Whereas in the other maps, I don't know if you remember or if you noticed or if I mentioned it, evidence policy decisions affect the stock levels, they affect the access to crew, they affect other things. For the government, they're only affected by these three things in this system that is based on the 4 people that did maps. So, and this finally is the community map. So this is what the system would look like if all these 23 people sat together in one table and they started putting arrows connecting the dots. This is a combination of the 5 maps I just showed you, which are a combination of the 23 individual maps. And things now become interesting because even if in one map, and I'm going to talk about mental health again as an example because it's a very characteristic example, even if, you know, fishers do not believe in the importance of mental health or representation doesn't, just because researchers and civil society does, in the whole system, it is important. And the same goes for the evidence policy decisions. We saw how government has it as a goal and it doesn't affect anything. But if you see when all the stakeholders come together, you see how many things it affects if they all sit at the same table and they have conversation. Again, for the entire community, investment is the most important thing. It practically affects the entire system because it has connections to so many indicators, which have connections to all the rest indicators that are remaining. And stock levels also become important exactly for the same reason, because this is all the stakeholders speaking. I'm not going to talk more about the network analysis of this community map, because this is not the purpose of this presentation, but the results have been published. So if somebody is interested, I can share the link of the paper and you can see how trade-offs and synergies appear and which indicators are influential, which indicators act as bridges between others, and which indicators influence the system most. So this is the design of the map. This is the map. It was the first step. Then, as I mentioned, if this works, apart from asking them to create the map, to do all the connections between the elements, we also asked the stakeholders to rank or give a score to each of the indicators. That was a score between 1 and 10 that depicts the current situation of of the specific indicator according to their perception. So, for example, we were asking them to rate investment. The question was how good or how, well designed is investment in the Scottish fisheries now as we speak. And you can see that investment, for example, which is the most important indicator in all the maps and in the community map, scores just over 5 out of 10. Economic security scores really low. The fishers are the only one actually who believe that their economic security is over 5. The people that support them, fishermen's missions, find it really, really low. Altogether, they score it around 5. Job satisfaction scores quite high, 7.6, with fishers scoring it nearly to 10. They're very satisfied. But the government thinks differently, and that's probably because of the feedback they are receiving. Stock levels relatively high, but you can see here how the operational cost, this is a negative. So the operational cost gave, the higher it is, the higher are the operational costs. So the fishers scored it at 10 and they're super high, the highest they can be. But altogether, the stakeholders scored it at 8.9. And the indicator that has the highest score is environmental policies. Again, this is can be perceived as a negative score because this doesn't measure how many environmental policies we have. it measures the impact of these environmental policies on fishers, regardless of whether this impact is negative or positive. How much these environmental policies that are being applied in Scotland are now interfering with fisheries and fishers' life. This is the highest scoring indicator. And this is the scoring that we're going to use later. The second step. The third step, as I mentioned, was to do a modularity class and classify the indicators. The modularity analysis of a network is a specific analysis that clusters all the elements of a network based on their connections, not based on their scoring, but based on where they sit in the network and what they connect to and what they affect and what they are affected by. So this is what the modularity analysis gave us. This doesn't have any qualitative interference. It's simply what the network suggested, but we see it in a broader sense. We see them in a broader sense coincide with the 5 sustainability pillars. We have the economic, environmental, social, governance, and human indicators. Of course, there might be some debates around this because you can see that operational costs appear here and not in the economic, where the quality of catch appears in the human, where it probably should have been in the environmental. But because this is based on the connections and not on the scorings or any other attribute, for this specific system, we would say, for this specific system, the way it was designed by all our stakeholders, the operational costs are a governance issue and not an economic issue. They don't relate to investment or revenue or subsidies, but they relate to representation, science, evidence, policy decisions. So in that sense, they fall where the system says. So based on what we had the map, we had the scorings, and we had the modularity classes. Our goal was to create well-being scenarios. So the first step to do that, which was the main exercise of this work, was to define the scenarios. We decided, together with experts, that we want an economic scenario, an economic growth, something based on economic trying to achieve economic growth, a purely environmental scenario, if that focuses only on the protection of the sea, and then a holistic scenario that takes elements from all the 5 modularity classes. And to see how these compare, the ultimate goal being to compare an environmental a policy based on environmental protection, and policy based on economic growth, and a policy based on a well-being economy. To choose the indicators that would go into the scenario that would, define the scenario, out of the 37 we had 2 voting exercises. One was wide with a larger number of stakeholders, and it was through an email, when we were asking them to rate them into, not rate them, just characterize them as actionable or not, and if they can be used as lever or not. And that was to distinguish certain things that make sense anyway. For example, job satisfaction, it's a very important indicator, but it's not something that you can change. It only changes organically. But a government cannot say, I'm going to increase job satisfaction. So we wanted to figure out, but through experts' opinion and voting, which indicators we can actually use and say, yes, I can increase that, or yes, I can decrease that through policies to create my scenario. We narrowed it down the list to a smaller number. And then in a couple of focus groups, we had a second voting exercise. So out of this smaller list, we asked the participants of the focus group to vote the 5 more important for economic, the 5 more important for environmental, and the 5 more important for the holistic scenario. But of course, not everybody voted for the same 5. So there was sort of a qualitative discussion to reach consensus and have 5 indicators for each scenario. And then based on the scorings that were presented to them, the stakeholders agreed what would be the desired state. So we have the current state. We know, for example, that investment is at 5.5 and we want to increase it at 6, and that is a certain percentage increase. This is how the scenarios were created, and this is the scenarios we came up with. So in total, we have 4 scenarios. The first is the baseline scenario. The baseline scenario is how the system moves anyway if we don't interfere with it, because the system is dynamic and one indicator affects the other, and each indicator has a score. The system will change anyway, and these scores will change anyway. And this is the baseline scenario. Then we have the economic growth scenario, which is this: access to credit, access to markets, quantity of catch, subsidies, and operational costs. The environmental impact scenario: environmental policies, actions, science, wind farms, quantity of catch. And the holistic scenario that has one indicator from each modularity class: that's operational costs, environmental actions, quantity of catch, access to healthcare, and ability to choose the fishing grounds, which is basically reduction of the spatial squeeze. We run the scenarios, and this is the outcome. So this is the baseline scenario. This is how each indicator would change. This is percentage values if we didn't do anything. So we can see some here. This is the influence on policies. The influence on policies, for example, would increase by 50% in a time frame of the next 5 years or so. That's how we define this scenario if we don't do anything. The sense of identity would reduce, operational costs would reduce, revenue would increase. We have job satisfaction would be reduced, which is something we probably care about, and so would quality of life. And so on. These are all the indicators, well, not all, but most of the indicators in the system. This is what will happen under the baseline. This is what will happen under the economic scenario. We see that more things start to reduce, and by higher percentages. The environmental policies would reduce, because we would focus on economic growth, and that always has an impact on the environment. So with the environmental activism, mental health would increase by a lot. Revenue as well, of course, and all the economic indicators. But job satisfaction would still reduce by 37%, okay, even though all the economic indicators would increase. This is the environmental scenario. The environmental scenario is sort of an expected result. Everything that relates to the environment would increase. Here's the state of the marine environment. We have an increase of 5%, where in the other two is practically remained the same. But everything else would decrease. Job satisfaction, again, by 37.66%, and quality of life by 34%. And finally, this is the holistic scenario. Here we see more things increasing. Even stock levels and the state of the marine environment increase very moderately. The stock level basically doesn't increase at all, but it just stays in the same condition. But as you remember, it was close to 7.9, so it's already quite high. Mental health increases by 55%, but this is the only scenario we have an increase in job satisfaction and a small increase in quality of life. In all the other scenarios, they were reducing. This is the comparison of the entire system, the systemic shifts. But then, as I said, the last step of the analysis, if the slide changes. Why it doesn't change? Okay. Do something. Yeah, I have to exit full screen, sorry. To move to the next one, I don't know why it doesn't move. So, as I said, the last step was to test certain key performance indicators, again, co-decided with the stakeholders. And what we decided to test and to see what actually what actually we care about and what we're looking at if we change the scenarios was from the economic pillar, from the economic modularity class, investment and economic security, from the governance, the influence on policies and the evidence policy making, from the human job satisfaction, from the environmental, the stock levels and the state of the marine environment, and for the social, the quality of life and mental health. Some of them were chosen because they're their degree is very high. They're very important. Also because others because the stakeholders had an interest in them. And here you can see how their scores change across the 4 scenarios. The actual scores, so not how they change, what they become across the 4 scenarios. You see investment goes really, really high. You remember it was close to 5.5 and it goes to, in the economic scenario, it goes quite high. So it does in the holistic, not so much in the environmental. It stays the same as the baseline and so on for all of them. But what's more important to look at is the percentage change from the start values. It's similar to the graph I showed earlier, but only for the KPIs, so it's easier to read. And we can see here what happens in the baseline across all of them. Just going to leave it for a minute. Economic security 7.5, evidence policy decisions 2.1, influence on policies 15.4. Investment 4.3, job satisfaction reduces, mental health increases moderately, quality of life reduces, and the state of the marine environment and the stock level reduced only by 0.41%, so practically they remain the same. In the economic, we had the same state of the marine environment, stock levels reduce a bit more, 3%. Mental health increases by a lot, and so does investment, but we can see the strong reduction in job satisfaction and quality of life, and the small decrease in the score of the evidence policy decisions. This is the environmental. Job satisfaction and quality of life remain increased by a lot. Of course, we expect the state of the marine environment to improve by 5%. And the influence on policies remained absolutely the same as it is. And this is the holistic scenario where we see all the indicators, almost all the indicators increasing, except of the stock levels that remain practically the same. Even on the quality of life, we see a slight increase. Mental health increases by a lot. So does investment. And it's the only scenario that increases job satisfaction. Yeah, I'm going to have the same problem now. So I'm going to have to. So just to summarize the work, because I think I have been speaking for quite a while now, the economic growth scenario increased, it showed clear financial gains, but it has weaker outcomes from social environmental dimensions. The environmental impact, as expected, protects the marine environment, but there are trade-offs in other indicators, especially the social ones. And the holistic scenario is more balanced across the KPIs. It increases all the KPIs, and it performed the best overall, which is basically what we were trying to see. In conclusion, yes, there are systemic effects. Yes, the system behaves in different ways if you change it. Influence on policies had the stronger outcomes in the holistic scenario. Economic security, well, again, in the holistic scenario, it's positive everywhere, but in the holistic scenario had a higher positive change. Mental health and investment were sensitive to scenario choice, but they improved most on the holistic approach, and job satisfaction and the quality of life only improved in the holistic scenario. They decreased in everything else. Well, the marine environment and the stock levels saw modest improvement in the holistic and a bit higher improvements in the environmental. As far as the method is concerned, the fuzzy cognitive mapping, the main advantage it had was that we stakeholders were able to share knowledge without sitting together at the same table. So we avoided all the qualitative conversation, all the conflicts, because everybody was able to give their opinion to the others without having to come into conflicting conversation. Also, the voting was the same. Instead of presenting a huge list of indicators, we were able to narrow it down in a few steps. And this provides a replicable framework. So if somebody has it, then they can go back to it every few years and reevaluate it and see what happened, what has changed, and what can be changed. But also for other sustainability domains, not just for well-being. And the most important thing, and that's what I want to close with, is that we observed that stakeholders accepted the relations that appeared in the community map, even though they hadn't indicated them in their own maps. And the most important example for this is mental health, and that's why I keep coming back to it. Because if you remember, in the Fisher's map, mental health was just on the side, was not affecting anything, and it was only affected by access to healthcare. And that is because from qualitative conversations, we have understand that it's because mainly what a fisher thinks about mental health, they think that they have to go to counseling and talk about their childhood and about their feelings and all these things. But then when they saw the community map and they saw, that an inclusive local community increases mental health, and then good mental health increases revenue, they agreed with that. In general terms, they said that yes, this is happening. If I'm included, but if I'm better included in the community, that does affect my mental health, and if I'm better, I do make more money. And this is the biggest value of this method. That was all from me. Here are my contact details in case you want to ask any questions or get in touch. And I think I will stop. No, I won't stop sharing, but I will open the floor to questions.
Thank you very much, Nenya. It was really interesting, and there is a lot of food for thought. The map looked fantastic, I have to say. So we can now open the floor to any sort of questions. And I don't think there are any questions in the chat, so maybe if you can raise your hand and ask the questions directly, and then Julie on the other side can facilitate.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Nothing in the chat as such. Can you see any hands up? Me. Somebody sitting next to me has got her hand up. Go ahead, Alice.
Oh, great. Yeah, Nenny, that was an amazing, really, really interesting approach. Yeah, very, very interesting. I love the way that the different mapping of the relationships between the indicators showed those really different perspectives among the different sort of groups. And I wondered, does that make it really important to consider who you have in the room when who constitutes that community? Because this has fishers as one group. Obviously, within that group, there's diversity, sort of small scale leads, and how did you sort of think about who you had in the room, and would you have liked to have anyone that wasn't there, or?
Yes. First of all, you need to have everyone in the room, as you call it, but these research didn't put them in the same room, because usually, from experience, not only with fishers but with every policy making procedure where many stakeholders are involved, putting them all together in a room, I mean, everybody knows what happens. So this tried to put them in the room without having them sit around the same table. We chose the ones that, according to the literature, according to experts, because this is all based on prior conversations and qualitative work and other work that has been done, are more interested in fishers' well-being, the ones that influence the policies. At the beginning, for example, we thought of having retailers in the conversation, ask retailers to do such a map. But then we didn't reject it, but we put the idea on the side because a retailer for this kind of research would care about fishers' well-being in the sense of labeling. They can say, yeah, I care about fishers' well-being, but we don't know if they would have any interest in their mental health or in their inclusion in the local community. So we left this kind of group outside. Depending on the time you have and your goals, you can include more groups, but I wouldn't make it huge.
Yeah, I was interested in that too. Like, you say you chose a certain amount of indicators. I guess the danger is the more people you include, the more they could add to that model. Or
we chose a certain amount of indicators. The initial idea was to not have any indicators, just give them a blank paper to say, what is well-being for you? But then it starts becoming very complicated because people put in, things like seeing my wife or, and this is all, quality of life. But then this starts becoming very, very, spread out. So, yeah.
That's great, thank you. Damien, I think you have a question.
Oh, I do indeed. Sorry, Nadia, I was a bit late actually because my meeting overran. So sorry about that. But no, thanks for that really interesting paper. No, just this kind of mental health angle. You probably know of it already, Nadia, but there's some really interesting work going on in kind of farming context now, like farming community contexts. I don't know how they build their kind of maps and things, but I know like there's a team down in Exeter, for example, which are doing really interesting work on things like accidental counsellors and all this sort of stuff, like how, but also just trying to get the kind of the topic of mental health more more front stage, if you like. So I think there could be an interesting kind of connection. I haven't seen I don't know the literature as well as some other colleagues would do, but it seems like quite an interesting theme that's emerging in the data. But there's some good. David Rose is working on it. Rebecca Wheeler's working on it. There's probably other people as well, but in the kind of farming community context, it's become quite a live discussion, really. And I know there's various projects now being funded, but I haven't seen anything in the fishers space. I might be wrong. So there might be.
No, mental health is not very heavily investigated, but this research showed that there is room for investigation for mental health because the perspectives are so different. There's grounds. It's blank paper.
I'll just I'll pop one of their papers in the
do please.
We've got a question in the room here from Cicely.
Hi. Hiya. I wondered if you thought this approach might generate quite conservative solutions. If you've got people who, you're giving them the levers and they're sort of voting or drawing the connections based on the status quo, the things as it is now, so relationship between higher catch and higher well-being, and then you get the trade-offs at the end of environmental policy and economic. I wonder, and then you pull the different levers, but I wonder if it's all quite constrained by society and the constraints that the people are living in at the moment, rather than these and sort of a transformational change. Is that
it is constrained.
It
is constrained by the society people live in. That's why it's case specific. This is not a model that you did in Scotland and then you can take it as it is to Canada. You have to redo it there because all the scores, I think you're referring, if I'm understanding correctly, you're referring to the scores they gave, right?
Yeah, well, or like the scenarios at the end. If you come up with your holistic scenario at the end, I wonder if there's scope for one of those scenarios to be a kind of real blue skies type solution where I don't know, somehow economics becomes disconnected from well-being in a kind of post-capitalist world sort of thing.
Yeah,
Or
okay, yeah, I
do you
see what you
see
mean. Yeah. No, I see what you mean. Yes, yeah, I see what you mean. I see the restrictions. The what this research tries to do, like we try to talk to as many stakeholders as possible and try to make sure that it encompasses everything. Yeah, it's localized, so there are these restrictions. Yeah, that's why I keep going back to this localization. Yes, it depends on the context. People find, other things important in certain regions. This was not even in the entire Scottish region. This was the nephrops fisheries in the north east. So yeah, the short answer is yes, but this is research, so it's a pilot study. We are hoping to see how, it can be improved and try to affect policies. I see what you mean because, we can give the impression that we chose the scenario that would give the good solution. But it didn't happen in this case, unless it happened accidentally. But if it's solidified and if people find a way to, have this done as part of policy design, these kind of caveats will be examined and sorted out.
Cool, thank you. There's a question from S2120432. Sorry, I don't have a name.
It's me, it's Adam.
Oh, Adam, hi, sorry. I didn't know you went by that
Otherwise
code
known
number,
as
code name.
otherwise known as 2120432.
Well, Adam, you can rename yourself next time.
Like prison
No,
number.
keep it like that.
That'd be a very odd request, would it, officially changing my name to a number? Sounds fair, actually. Gives me more weight, I think. Anyway, really interesting. Thanks, Nania. And this is more of a comment and a question, really. Having recently sort of delved into the world of modelling and that kind of thing, I instantly saw your map. I thought, wow, it's dealing with complexity really well. Because I've recently put together a model with Fahima in PLS, and aligned with the little bubbles, I have numbers and the paths have coefficients. And I was looking at your map and I was thinking, it really deals with complexity well. And I don't think I'd manage to get any sort of R value that would work very well if there were actual data aligned with the indicators, if you see what I mean. So
yeah,
I think it's a really good approach for dealing with complexity by skipping this part around using actual metric data or Likert scales and saying, well, what's important to you? How does that, affect these other elements in the map? Kind of giving it like a user approach rather than a more of a statistical objective approach where you have to look at the formative or reflective nature of constructs and coefficients and that kind of thing. So I thought that was really good. And I was just wondering if you think it's applicable in the context of behavioral drivers.
Sorry, the context of, sorry.
Sort of behavioral drivers. So if I was interested in a particular behavior amongst anglers, for example, could a similar approach be taken?
It could, but you need to design the framework differently, like the conceptual framework.
Yeah.
We did have the first time I used this method was for farmers, farm level sustainability. So what farmers do to achieve farm level sustainability. So I don't know if you would call it behavior or management decisions, but you could, in the sense that something affects something else and so on. I'm not really sure. I mean, it's a longer conversation that we can have later if you want. But I'm not really sure if you can have the circular effect, because if you're targeting a behavior, say, I want to see what affects farmers doing this, then this doesn't affect many things because it's your end goal.
Yeah,
I don't know
yeah,
if that makes sense.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it can work, but it needs a different design.
Different, but something could be achieved, perhaps.
It could be achieved, like you can still design the map and have the network analysis and the scenarios, but we won't have the circularity.
Yeah,
This is my brief answer. We can have a conversation at some other point.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that'd be really good.
Check it,
I mean,
but yeah,
we could even maybe compare.
yeah. You can still build a fuzzy logic model.
Yeah,
but you can't have this circular.
No, okay. Yeah, well, let's talk further, because I think there might be
Okay.
something to do with maybe applying this approach to the model I've already been for weather and PLS. We could maybe do a test comparison or something. But
Sure.
yeah, great. Thanks.
Fahima, do you want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Faith. Hi, everyone. As I'm working with Adam on the fisheries, I think it's possible with network analysis. And the way that Nenia created this map even brings something new to my mind that is very creative, to look at the indicators relationship through the maps. And not just looking at the individuals or nodes. We can look at these indicators as each node can be connected to the other one based on the strength of their relationship and how the two nodes are connected to each other. And then we can see how these nodes are bigger compared to the others, that they have less influence. And I think with this method that Nenia used, it's possible to apply that, Adam.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking this is a really good opportunity to maybe make the two speak to each other.
Yeah.
Amazing. Sorry to step in, but maybe we have time for one more questions. I mean, this is intriguing conversation, but I think you can also, continue outside of the seminar. But if anyone's got a last question to ask, now is the time.
There's a question from Molly saying, "What's next for the project, Nenia?"
This is the final step that we need to take these results back to some experts or some of the stakeholders to discuss them, so we can write the discussion of our paper. And then I think it will conclude as a research project, but we have already presented it to consultancies and policymaking across Europe and the United States. And there's a lot of interest, especially after the first paper has been published. So hopefully we can improve the method outside the academic outputs and make it a bit more solid and see how we can actually help policy design, at least at the first theoretical level for this specific work. It is very hard, like these maps take a long time to create. They're time consuming, and especially for the stakeholders. So this is not something that you can go back doing, like you can't go again to them next year and say, okay, now I'm doing a map on this other thing. So, I mean, they know what it is. They've already told you your opinion, but they can go back to it and refine it and adjust it and calibrate it to the current conditions. They can redo the scoring, and this way it can work across time.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you. Over to you, Katerina, to conclude.
Thank you. I was just wondering whether, because Ingrid, your co-author, is here, whether or not she would like to add anything before we conclude the seminar.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll leave that to her. If she's silent for 7 seconds, she doesn't.
Yes.
Thanks, Nenia, and thanks everyone. No, it was nice to see this work presented in this way, and I don't have anything substantive to add, except that some of the stakeholders who helped us are on this call today, and we're extremely grateful. As you can see, it really does depend on the goodwill and the voluntary time that many of these people give up, and they're not paid for it or given any kind of contribution. And so we're extremely grateful for their time and energy and efforts. And as you can imagine, the Scottish fishing industry is not one that is undersampled in many ways. And what has been really nice here is that they're still willing to talk to us, still willing to engage with ongoing projects. So they obviously see value in it, and you know, the interactions and relationships between each of the different stakeholders has also been interesting to see, and how and how much they do work together, even if they do have sort of differing what you might consider to be overall aims and objectives. So yeah, we couldn't do this work without them. So a huge thank you to them.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't see who is in the call. Thanks to everyone who contributed, who gave an opinion, all the experts that voted, all the stakeholders that sat with us in the focus groups and in the voting exercises. Yeah, it has been really, really helpful. This is all stakeholder based. So yeah, thanks to everyone.
Great. And I think it's a good way to finish this. So thank you very much for everyone who took the time and joined us today. And hopefully we'll see you in another CCRI seminar. And thank you once again, Nenya, and also Ingrid in the background. So thanks a lot, and see you then.
Thanks, everyone.
And we will put it on obviously CCRI YouTube channel. Bye then.